Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, Bleak. I know it's been a while. I finally got a new phone because I was having issues with memory, basically, like not having enough room on my phone to record videos. So anyway, that's why I haven't been recording videos, but hopefully I can get back to it now that I have a new phone. Anyway, I wanted to talk today about a little bit about Bryan Kohberger and there's been a lot of new filings that have dropped in the last couple weeks, I would say. Finally, we're starting to get information. For those of you who don't know, I'm sure most of you that follow this kind of stuff are aware of this, but in case for some reason you're not aware, in criminal cases, you're able to access all the court filings. It's all public information. And even Bryan Kohberger's case, because it's so, there's so much public interest, Ada County, which is where the trial is being held in Boise, has like a special link on their county court website where you can look at all of the filings. Some of them are quite long and there's a lot of legal mumbo jumbo, so it's kind of nice sometimes to have somebody kind of break down the highlights. One of the things that came out about the case recently, and in general, at first I wanted to say that there's a lot of disinformation, misinformation, whatever you want to call it, that comes out in true crime cases. And there's a lot of conspiracy theories, and for some reason, it's like people want everything to be some, oh, this person's being framed, this is, some innocent person. And I understand, like, there are rare cases of innocent people being convicted, and I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but it's not typically in cases where there's a lot of coverage and where there's all this overwhelming evidence pointing to somebody like there is in the Bryan Kohberger case. It's not, I think people, I don't know if they want it to be like in the movies, but something that a lot of people are talking about is in the latest filings, there was some documents from this guy named Cy Ray, and he was basically talking about some records that they, in Idaho, that sorry, I'm distracted because my kids are walking by and it's the middle of the night. So in Idaho, they were talking about, this Cy Ray was saying, oh, the prosecution's hiding these records that are showing that Kohberger turned his phone off, I think either like 7 minutes later than what the prosecution is saying, and also is saying that he was headed, he was headed west, and Moscow is east of Pullman, which is where he's from, and Cy Ray is like, oh, he was heading west, and he turned his phone off a little later, and tried to make it seem like the prosecution's hiding stuff, when in reality, AT&T actually responded, the prosecution responded to those allegations and had basically a statement from AT&T saying that they didn't get the records that this Cy Ray was accusing them of having. So basically, they have AT&T supporting them and saying, like, these records that he's claiming they had access to, they in fact did not, and it had to do with, even back in 2022 when this crime happened, the things are changing in forensics and digital forensics all the time, so AT&T just was saying, like, the evidence that they were given at the time is actually, it's changed now, whereas they probably would have gotten more detailed records if the crime happened today versus happening in 2022. So, like, policies have changed. I mean, there are new advancements, happening on a daily basis. So there's that. But the other thing I wanted to say about this, because, there are these people that so badly for whatever reason. I don't know if they really believe Kohberger's innocent or if they're just trying to be a troll or if they're easily manipulated, brainwashed. I don't know what the answer is as to the why. But there are people that keep talking about this Syray affidavit as if it's like some bombshell, piece of evidence for the defense that's just going to change the trajectory of the case for the defense. And if you really think about what he's saying, even if what he's saying is true, that the cell phone evidence is showing something a bit different, meaning like his cell phone was shut off, let's say 7 minutes later. He wasn't, or the white Elantra was not spotted in Moscow until 3:26 in the morning, okay? That's when I believe Kohberger starts kind of driving around the area. He's kind of circling around the house, right? They've come up with all these timestamps talking about where he was at certain times where they're spotting that vehicle. Now, it's less than 15 minutes to get from Pullman, Washington to Moscow, Idaho. So even if we're going to say, okay, let's say he didn't turn his phone off at 2:53. Let's say he turned it off at 3 o'clock, okay? And I think they might even be saying he turned it off at 2:53, but I'm going to, just to give him make the time frame even tighter, just to show why this is insignificant. If he turned his phone off at 3 o'clock, which I think it might even be that they're saying it's earlier than that, but let's just say 3 o'clock in the morning, obviously. And let's say he's trying to throw off investigators, which there's a lot of evidence that he was very much intent on committing like the perfect crime. So he starts heading west, right? Because he wants to throw off investigators and make it look like, before he turns his phone off, that he's going the opposite direction of Moscow. That to me, so then he turns off his phone at 3 o'clock and immediately, I don't know if he was on a back road or a freeway or a highway, but he could have exited off on the next exit and then started going east immediately after his phone is off. So, and he could have made it easily to Moscow by 3:15 in the morning. So when the defense talks about this, being crucial information and this 7 minutes is so critical, it's a bunch of baloney, honestly. And it's like, I don't know if the defense is like counting on people not really understanding certain things or not reading legal documents, but it's almost kind of insulting. It's kind of like the Blake Lively case, like wanting people to believe she's innocent, which I want to talk about that case as well a little bit here. But, so yeah, I wanted everybody to know that the Syray thing, if you're seeing people talk about it and they're trying to act like it's some big thing for the defense, it's not. It's really not. Other than that, I think most people that follow the case are probably pretty much aware of the big highlights of the recent filings with they have proof he bought the knife sheath and the knife, which is a big deal. Dateline had already reported on that many, many months ago, but some people were skeptical that it wasn't true. Another thing with the Kohberger case I want to bring up that I don't think I've talked much about is the Papa Rogers account in the Facebook group. There's people that still want to debate like, oh, maybe it was him, maybe it wasn't him. That's another one of those things that I don't understand how people are like debating it. And there are some things in true crime cases that you can debate about, right? Like, we don't know every little detail of the crime in Idaho that happened, but we can make some inferences off of the evidence that we know about. But when it comes to something like the Papa Rogers account, everybody wants to act like it's, oh, well, maybe it was him, maybe it wasn't. Okay. Papa Rogers was definitely Bryan Kohberger. Here's the thing. The profile picture attached to Papa Rogers looks just like Bryan Kohberger. It looks like maybe like an older version of him, but it literally looks just like him. That's number one. That would be one heck of a coincidence just on its own. Number two, Papa Rogers posted about thinking that the knife sheath was left. He posted about that in a group, in the Facebook group, way prior to Kohberger even being on the radar of the police. His name was not given to authorities until December 19th of 2022, and he was posting about thinking that the perpetrator had left the knife sheath far prior to that. So coincidentally, he's the only person on the internet making that assumption. Because I had some people say, well, there was this article that came out saying that the authorities had gone to a knife shop and were looking for, that they were inquiring about that type of knife. But the thing is, even if that's true, which it is, there was an article. When I read that article, my first thought was not, oh, he must have left the sheath at the crime scene. My thought is, okay, they know this person used a knife, and maybe they were able to kind of narrow it down based like on the wounds of the person or of the victims or something along those lines. But it would never occur to me like, oh, the person probably brought a sheath and left it at the crime scene. Like there's a lot of mental gymnastics that go into making that presumption based on an article like that. And again, you already have this coincidence of this person their picture looking just like Kohberger, and now this person also, whose profile picture looks just like Kohberger, also happens to figure out this very specific detail about the crime and what was left at the crime scene. And the third thing is the name Papa Roger. It's spelled Rodger. The Roger is like an homage to this Elliot Rodger, who's a mass murderer, and he was like a self-described incel, and a lot of people described Kohberger as an incel, or having that kind of mentality. So Elliot Rodger seems like somebody that Kohberger would have idolized or admired, whatever word you want to use. So I think you can put all those things together, and it's not like some big mystery. And I don't know if it's like what it is, but I've just been so annoyed with the true crime community. And it's not that I'm out here saying like, oh, I know everything, and but I'm talking about like factual information, objective information, and inferences that are reasonable. And it seems to me like there's just this small subset of people in true crime that want everything to be like a CSI TV show drama, and they look at it more like it's a game or it's for their own entertainment. And I think that can be really terrible. Like in the Idaho case, if you look at all the conspiracies surrounding the surviving roommates, for example, it can be really detrimental to victims. And so I just think people need to be really careful. And another case, and this is going to be controversial and people might be bothered by this, but the Long Island serial killer case. there is a young lady, or there was, she's deceased now, but her name was Shannon Gilbert. And she's the one that made the 911 call in the Long Island serial killer case. And her 911 call led to discovering the Gilgo Beach victims. Shannon Gilbert was an escort, like a lot of the other, or all the other victims were, which, you know, that's fine. I'm not saying anything negative about that as a profession, or as, you know, I'm not a judgmental person. But I will say Shannon Gilbert's mother really wanted her to have been a victim of the Long Island serial killer, and she claimed that she thought that she was. The problem is, it's very evident that Shannon Gilbert was intoxicated on likely multiple substances, and she was very paranoid. And at the time that that call came in, she was with a couple other people, including her driver, and they were trying to get her to get back in the vehicle so she could leave, because she started having like a mental health episode. And she starts basically running away in this gated community. And even she started knocking on doors, and one guy, he was an older guy, offered to let her sit in his house while he called 911, and she wouldn't. Like, she was just very paranoid of everybody and everything, and she was like running away from anybody. There were some people that wouldn't let her in, you know, and I can understand that. Like, there was an elderly woman who might have been alone. I could see not wanting to just let some random person into your house in the middle of the night. But there were people that were willing to let her just sit there. And she was leery of those people too, even though she had no reason to be leery of just like some random person in a house, especially like an elderly person that she had had no interactions with prior. So she ended up not being found right away, but she was found in basically a marsh, and the terrain was so bad that you basically would get stuck in the mud. So, I mean, it makes sense that she succumbed to the elements, unfortunately. Ran to the wrong place and just couldn't get out of there. And the thing is if she died and it had to do with her addiction, if she had addiction issues, that's okay. It doesn't make her less of a person. We don't need to pretend that she was a victim of LISC just to make it, I think people just makes it seem like she's a better person or something. We don't need to do that. Law enforcement has come out and said, you know, she had an autopsy done, and the autopsy showed she died of natural causes as far as they could tell. Her body had been out in this environment for a long time, and so it's not like, you know, there could have been animal activity. There was decomposition, obviously, because when the medical examiner and the police said, hey, you know, it's appearing that she died of natural causes, her mother hires an attorney and they get this Dr. Baldoni. Now, a lot of people say, oh, Dr. Baldoni is, you know, he's a very elderly guy, and he's kind of like one of those guys that whenever somebody wants a second opinion, they call him, and he basically gives them the opinion that they're looking for, which I think is kind of unethical, because the idea that you're always going to come up with the opinion that the person wants seems not statistically possible. But of course he says, oh, her hyoid was broken and she was strangled. Well, her hyoid could have come been broken by an animal. It's a very fragile, small bone that is, right here, and it can be indicative of being strangled, but you can't determine that when someone's body's not found, for almost, I think it was a year almost later. It's just, you can't. And, people want it to be this conspiracy where the police are hiding information, but the police have no reason not to want her to be a LISK victim. That doesn't even really make sense. Either way, her phone call to the police, even if it was because she was paranoid and on substances, her phone call led to the discovery of the Gilgo Beach victims, and that doesn't take anything away from that. A lot of people struggle with substance abuse. A lot of people struggle with addiction. It doesn't make her less of a person. It doesn't make her death, in vain. Nothing like that. So I think we just need to tell the truth and not lie to ourselves, because there's a lot of that goes on in the true crime community. And I don't know. I get that, there's always this, oh, well, everyone has a different opinion. And, yeah, there can be differences of opinion on like little nuances of cases, like not knowing precisely what happened. But when it comes to like, for example, in the Idaho case, like, oh, the surviving roommates were drug dealers and BK was their pimp and he was a drug lord, and things that there's no evidence of at all at the crime scene. Yeah, a couple of the victims' parents had some drug abuse issues, but there is no evidence that their kids were involved in anything to do with that at all. Yet you still have people out there saying these things, and just people and defense attorneys will latch on to it as well, because they're counting on people that are like following these cases not closely enough to like really realize how off base the information is, but they're following it closely enough to like possibly get on a jury, or, well, not that that has anything to do if you'll get on a jury or not, but they know that that's their jury pool. And the same thing is happening with like the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni case. When it comes to that case, okay, there is objective evidence, and I have other videos that I've done on that case specifically if you want to watch them. But there is objective evidence that Blake Lively lied. This is not like, oh, 50-50, like he said, she said, maybe, maybe she's lying, maybe he's lying. No, this is not that. Okay? Blake Lively, was methodical and intentional. And I'm telling you this because the scene was that dance montage scene. She chose that scene to draw most of her claims from on purpose, intentionally, because that scene was not supposed to have any audio recorded for it, because it was for a visual montage that they were going to play music over. So Blake Lively was under the impression that there was no audio recorded, and we know that she was under that impression because she said so in one of her lawsuits. And so she dissected that scene in her mind, thinking that she could say whatever she wanted about it, mischaracterize, take interactions that they had and make them seem a different way, because she was like, well, they're never going to be able to actually hear what I was saying or what he was saying. And little did she know that Justin Baldoni, being the director of the film, had the audio. So one by one, you can look at her claims of sexual harassment, especially drawn from that scene in particular, and you can debunk them by going through and watching that dance montage scene and listening to her claims. And mischaracterizing something is the same thing as lying. It really is, because changing the context can be the difference between an interaction being harassment versus not. So, for example, one of her claims is Justin Baldoni was talking out of character, and, you know, he was being himself even though he was supposed to be in character. But she fails to mention that they're recording a visual-only scene. She herself is talking out of character. Like, they're talking about how they're going to film the scene. And why would he talk in character when there's no dialogue and there's no audio being filmed? Or, excuse me, being recorded? That doesn't make any sense. Is he supposed to stand there and pretend to be his character Ryle as she's talking to, like, Blake's talking about her and Ryan never being able to stop talking to each other, and then he's supposed to respond to her as Ryle? Is he supposed to be like, hey, I'm, you know, who's Ryan? Who's this Ryan guy? Is like, really, is that what he's supposed to do? I mean, come on. Like, let's be real here. That doesn't even make sense. So that was one of her claims. Another claim was he just randomly said that she smelled good. The reality was she was talking about how her body makeup had, you know, an odor, and she was worried that he was, like, getting it on his face. And so she was making a comment about that, and then he responds, oh, I think it smells good. Like, referring to her body makeup smelling good. She characterized it as he just randomly leans into her, smells her, like he's Hannibal Lecter, and then said, quote, it smells so good. Okay? That is not what happened. And it's very obvious to see that. Nobody in good faith can say, oh, well, maybe her perception was off, or, you know, she just didn't, you know, understand. No. This is not that, okay? This is not that. I just want people to realize that her choosing a scene with no audio in her mind, again, she was incorrect about that, but I don't think she thought there was even a possibility of that audio being recorded. That was not an accident. Blake Lively is counting on people that don't follow the case very closely, that she has a lot of mainstream media that are still making false reporting about the case. She's counting on that in order to, otherwise she would have tried to settle the lawsuit by now. But she's counting on people believing this misinformation and these lies. And I'm telling you, the evidence is there if you really take the time to go through it and to watch it. And I've said this before, but, you know, part of I'm not usually interested in stuff like this, but, you know, if you've ever been actually sexually abused by somebody, the thought of somebody making this up when women are barely believed as it is pretty infuriating. And then for her team of lawyers to say that it's Baldoni making it hard for victims because, like, he's said in the past that women should be believed, but it's like, he knows Blake is lying, so is he supposed to say he believes her even though the accusations are against him. Like, that's absurd. And I just hope that there's this Me Too law in California that is meant to protect Me Too victims from retaliation when they file a lawsuit. But the problem is it doesn't really allow the person being accused to defend themselves. This is a law that was enacted in 2024, so it's relatively new. And the law itself wasn't really scrutinized, and it hasn't really been used much, so there's no precedent. But one of the arguments by Baldoni's team is, look, if you're saying I can't even do a counterclaim, basically defend myself against these accusations, that is a constitutional violation of freedom of speech. And obviously people have a right to respond to allegations. And I've talked with a lot of lawyers and legal experts, and they all agree that the claim of having a constitutional, that law violating the Constitution is actually, that claim has merit, and they think that it could go somewhere with the judge, because you can't say somebody, if they're accused of sexual harassment, that person's not allowed to respond. And that's basically what that law is saying. Like, it's considered retaliation if you make a counterclaim. And that's, honestly, I get what the law was trying to do, but I didn't take into consideration these unintended consequences. So, but anyway, one of those, so I watch the channel, there's a journalist named Kirsty Flaw. She is from, I think she's from Norway, and she's the one that did the interview where she said Blake Lively was like 8 months pregnant, and she said, the journalist Kirsty Flaw said, you know, congrats on your little bump, and Blake Lively very rudely was like, well, congrats on your little bump, and was very rude the entire interview. This journalist, I guess, had fertility issues in the past and could not conceive. Like, she was infertile. So it was, at that time, I think she had just had a miscarriage too. So it was like salt in the wound, really, for this poor journalist. And obviously Blake Lively I'm assuming didn't know that. But even so, it was just really a terrible comment. And the whole interview was bad. It wasn't just that. Like, she asked her a question about the costumes, and then Blake Lively was like, well, would you ask the men about the costumes? And the thing is Blake Lively is like Miss Fashionista, and she's even been quoted as saying that, that she thinks costuming is like the most important part of a character. So it's like, but yet people can't ask you about it without it being sexist. So anyway, I bring up Kirsty Flaw because there's a lot of rumors going around, or that these pro Blake Lively publications like Glamour magazine are falsely reporting, and New York Times initially falsely reported this as well, that Kirsty was part of the smear campaign by Justin Baldoni, and that she actually was hired to release that cringe interview of Blake Lively by Baldoni. And that's not true. Kirsty Flaw has repeatedly said, no, I've never spoken with him. I released that interview on my own because people had been talking about how Blake Lively wasn't a very nice person, and I had remembered that interview I had done, and so I just put it on my YouTube, like, because of that reason, not because anybody told me to, not because I was paid to. And if she had been hired or paid, like, that would come out. There would be records of text messages and other ways to find that out. So it's not true. That didn't happen. But like Glamour magazine and all these other people are still reporting that she was part of the smear campaign. So it's just another piece of this where it's like, when you're reading certain publications, just remember that Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds have a lot of power in Hollywood, and it's not, I mean, people will lie for them, right? There are certain people in the media that, or certain publications that are going to be on their side no matter what. And it could be for a multitude of reasons, right? Like, they could be getting paid. They could be, have a history with them where they got a lot of publicity for covering them for a certain film. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, but it's unfortunate because Blake Lively would have had to have conceded basically tried to cut a deal with Baldoni and apologize and all of that, but the only reason that hasn't happened yet is because there are still some people out there believing the misinformation. So don't be one of those people. I know we all have lives, and reading legal documents is boring and not something that everybody wants to do, but if you do read them all, I would guarantee that like 99% of you are going to come away thinking that Blake Lively fabricated allegations against Baldoni. I think the main motive was they wanted the rights to the sequel for It Ends With Us. Because Justin Baldoni already owns the rights to that as well. And Blake Lively actually has a publishing company, but none of her projects have really gotten off the ground. And I think she was like, this is going to be my project. And Baldoni is such a nice, easily manipulated, hippy-dippy dude that as soon as that CRD complaint comes out to the public, that I think she thought he would just fold completely. And because the CRD complaint is not actually a lawsuit, it's a requirement in California. It's the Civil Rights Department. It's a requirement to file a lawsuit. You have to do a CRD complaint first, but it seems to me like she just was planning on doing the CRD complaint and not a lawsuit, not thinking Justin Baldoni would fight back. And unfortunately, they underestimated him. They probably didn't realize that Steve Sarowitz, who is a billionaire, would be financing Baldoni. So just a lot of things that she wasn't counting on. But can you imagine if the audio on that montage scene hadn't been recorded? I think that Baldoni would have probably, who knows? I don't think he would have ever been criminally charged, but he would have been completely canceled. So anyway, I know I was kind of all over the place, but those are some of the things that have kind of been on my mind. And just as consumers of true crime, I think we need to do better. And if you're spreading around something that there's no evidence to back it up, and it's very salacious, and there's just no evidence of what you're saying, then it's not likely to be true. And so I think that's the big takeaway, is like, as the true crime community needs to know that these false narratives actually do have effects on real victims of crime. So just do better. That's my PSA. And I know there's going to be people that don't like some of the things I said, and that's fine. But yeah, I hope everyone has a great day. We'll talk to you soon.